Hi everyone, I'm Kadambari Sahu. I'm the head of design at ValueLabs. Design Inspire is a web series of passionate, innovative, and young inspiring designers. The web series dive into their passion, inspiration, and what makes them go. It's an effort to understand how they are navigating their career path and how they are investing their creative energies. We believe hearing their bold moves and inspiring stories will ignite interest and inspire the next generation of budding designers across the globe. So let's go forward with our guest today. Hi Dhruv, welcome to Design Inspire. How are you doing
Hi,
today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So the first part of the show is your choice presentation. So let's go forward.
hmm All right. Um, Let me start by sharing my screen.
Sure.
Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Hey, hello everyone. My name is Dhruv, and I'll be talking to you today about creativity and growth in my journey as a designer. So this is a time lapse I have from an experiment that I did of growing spinach without using soil and sunlight. And I think it kind of naturally fits in really well with the context of today's discussion. So this is going to be an overview of my learnings, decisions, and outcomes uh, as a designer. I have divided it into several chapters, and the first one that I want to talk to you about is jumping into the unknown. So that chapter really covers the decision that I made about moving from India to the United States. And there are a few reasons that I want to explain why. Um, First of all, right off the bat, really unpopular opinion. I would say that NID or National Institute of Design, where I did my master's degree in new media design, I felt it lacked a few things. So education at NID, don't get me wrong, it was eye-opening in many, many ways, especially for someone like me who comes from computer science engineering background with like very coding heavy mindset. Um, for that kind of a person, it was a really great experience to unlearn first and then start from level zero, start picking up on what design really means. That was mind blowing, but I still felt like it lacked a few things. And please note that this is not a complaint, but rather an honest observation that I have. And each educational institution is, in some sense, imperfect. So I just wanted to explore how I can fill in those gaps, how I can look outside, look at more educational institutes. The next reason is I wanted to get closer to the latest innovations that were happening in the world. So I'll talk about this in a bit more. I can say that this has really paid off really well in my experience. And then the last reason that I want to touch is the money. Yeah, not gonna lie. I was impressed to hear stories from a lot of friends and family about the work culture in the US. So I wanted to give it a shot. And it's not just only about the dollars, but largely about experiencing a different work culture, a different lifestyle from where I grew up, and then seeing how design is treated in the world of business, how design is explored as a discipline outside of India. So those were the reasons. And that's when I joined New York University Tisch School of the Arts. And honestly, it was a financial gamble when I look back at it. I come from a very simple yet extremely supportive and sweet family from the city of Pune in India. And this was a significant risk that I took by going to the art school uh, in the US. I genuinely think it is important to mention that here because I want the budding designers and makers, creators to understand that you must go and venture into what your heart really wants. The outcome may not always be the most beautiful one, but I promise you that will be the most rewarding one. So in my story, it paid off. It was unreal to, visit a different educational institute and, for example, see and learn physical computing from Tom Ego, who was the professor who created Arduino, or learning creative coding from Daniel Schiffman, who has created many maker tools such as processing or P5.js libraries. That was fun. So that was my first chapter, jumping into the unknown. And the best visual that I think that captures this essence really well is this painting by Van Gogh. This is Starry Night in New York's Museum of Modern Arts, which, by the way, I visited over a million times when I was a student in New York. With that, my next chapter related to that starry thing is investing in big ideas. So let's not call it big ideas, but let's rather call it your ideas. And I'll tell you why I don't really care about whether an idea is big or not, but it has to be a genuine one. That has a lot to do with how I joined Bose. So let's take a step back. This is a very interesting story and hopefully an inspiring one as well. This visual is the map of New York subway. Also my tribute to Massimo Vinelli and another legendary designer, Michael Hertz, who passed away earlier this year. So this is the map of New York City subway. And while in New York, I observed a very common phenomenon on the subways. I observed that people usually maintain their personal space by wearing headphones and listening to their personal choice of music. And many people are kind of headbanging as they listen to the music. And that's perfectly natural. That's very human to kind of catch up with the tune, catch up that beat, and start your reaction as like to that music. So it was, in a sense, it is very commonplace behavior. There's nothing really interesting or novel about that. But it's fun to just see so many people doing that asynchronously in their own zones in a very tight physical space like the subway. So I decided to kind of make something quick that would be fun and simple out of this observation. What I did was I simply mapped the up and down movement of the head to the volume of the music that you're listening to going up and down as you go up and down. And I mapped the left-right tilting of the head to panning the audio towards left and right. So as you tilt your head to the side, the audio is fed in gradually more and more from that side, and it goes away, fades out from the other side gradually. So I was able to put together a quick and dirty prototype real fast, and then I shared it with my classmates. And their minds were blown. If you think about it, it's like, this is really a stupid and straightforward idea, right? It's fairly easy to comprehend, even fairly easy to explain to a 10-year-old. But to experience something like this, that's a whole new dimension. It is so much fun. It's unreal. So after I shown this to my friends and classmates at New York University, I thought, why not scale it up? And I took it from showing it to about 10 people to taking it to over hundreds of people at the annual exhibition of interactive design projects at New York University. So this was amazing on so many levels because I got a number of worthwhile ideas from people who experienced this. I made a bunch of new connections. And most importantly, it was just so rewarding to see those smiles. And ultimately, this level of documentation and outreach was caught by the recruiters and designers from Bose. And in a simplistic sense, that's how I landed a job at Bose and moved from New York to Boston. So to back up a little bit, I'm not saying that this project was the sole reason why I got to work at Bose, but this project was without a doubt the most crucial factor in getting the right exposure and getting the right conversation started with the right people. So I think the takeaway here is small projects can really go a long way. And I would kind of encourage all of us to never discard your interesting ideas as worthless or as too small. You know, no idea is really too small and no dream is really too big. It's always very much rewarding in one way or another to follow your everyday passion. So I moved from New York to Boston, and I got to work on two flagship headphones at Bose. The first one is Quiet Comfort 35, which was already launched when I joined. I supported the post-launch interactions and design processes for this headphone. And then the one on the right side, Bose Headphones 700, is really my baby at Bose. This is the latest flagship noise cancelling product from Bose that I worked on right from inception, ultimately towards the launch. I worked on leading the design process on hardware interactions and gestures, as well as the Bose Music mobile app experiences to use these headphones. And I'm happy to share that this product won the IF Design Award and the Red Dot Best of the Best Design Award for the year 2020. So at Bose, although I took charge of the design processes of individual products, I was over the time also able to expand that to the entire headphones category. For example, defining general interaction design framework for how noise cancellation would work, not for just one headphones, but for the entire portfolio of headphones at Bose, or how Bluetooth pairing could be optimized for the entire portfolio of Bluetooth products at Bose. So this involved a really complicated process of getting all disciplines to coordinate together under a heavily design-driven framework. It was especially complex in an environment where hardware and software platforms kind of coexisted together under the same roof. So at that point, I thought, hey, this is really the summit. This is really the height of my career at this point. And my next chapter is climbing further up, even beyond you think you are at the summit. So if you are someone who has recently started their design career, there will be a point in your career where you will be extremely satisfied with a product launch, or you'll be extremely happy with the process, the service, or the project that you just worked on and handed off. I would say that especially at those points, really think about how you can take it up a step ahead. So that brings me to my next chapter in the story of how I switched my job from Bose to Facebook. The first reason I felt about working at Bose is that was a very limited walk of life. And I would rather love to broaden that scope and look at solving more widespread problems. The second reason was I was simply being greedy. With Bose flagship products, my design process had reached a million users. And now I wanted to scale that up. I wanted to target 1 billion users. Why not? So the scale and the user base is really a big motivator and really a good metric to chase as a designer. And then lastly, another reason is I wanted to tackle more abstract problems and more kind of abstract ideas than the tangible ones. So this is purely personal and a subjective reason, and something that I'm still trying to articulate in a better sense for myself. But these were essentially my reasons of why I wanted to move. And next I'll talk about the most common question I get these days, which is, how did I crack the design interview at Facebook? Unfortunately, there isn't just one key idea that will magically work just for everyone. But let me share an interesting part of my experience. When I interviewed on site at Facebook, I had to present my design projects as part of the interview process, right? So I'm going to share how I made the presentation for the day of the onsite stand out really well. I started my presentation at Facebook with a very intriguing visual caption. My presentation had a label. It was called Designing Experiences and Running a Half Marathon. And next I said that, hey, my name is Dhruv, and I'm here today because I would love to join you at Facebook. And I think just like preparing for a long run, preparing for a marathon, same as that, I believe design is a process of dreaming big and starting small. And you people, the interviewers at Facebook, are designing and building great products. So I want to dream big with you. That was the premise. Then I showed them 2 design projects that that I had worked on recently. One was about my broad expertise around high-level design, connecting the dot, thinking about product and brand. And then the next one was about the depth of my skills, especially the pixel level skills. Then coming back, this was the most interesting part. After presenting the two projects, I had a very nice wrap up of my presentation. I concluded by saying that, hey, I've worked on many exciting design projects and I've run many marathons in New York and Boston, which is true, by the way. And now let me join Facebook. Let me run my next marathon in San Francisco. So that was pretty nice. And, we designers always say that storytelling is the crux of everything. And I think that's 100% right. It does a lot of things. It shows how really serious and well prepared I am for this particular purpose of the presentation. And having a parallel story like this can really magically bring in a friendly vibe to the interview process, which is otherwise perceived most commonly as an intimidating process. So now, being a product designer at Facebook for almost 1 year, I am really delighted to see how I can grow exponentially when the environment around me is so much open and so much inspiring. Facebook's mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Um, and as I spend more and more time here at Facebook, I realize that these are not just fancy words, but I genuinely see that mission statement being reflected into all levels of decisions that are ever made at Facebook. That's pretty big. So I work at Business Integrity Organization within Facebook, where our mission is to enable trustworthy connections between people and businesses. That means tackling some of the world's latest and most prominent problems around the social digital space. So think of it this way: for larger social networks of any kind, with millions of users and businesses interacting in a digital ecosystem, there will always be new, emergent, and urgent problems that were never even articulated before in the history of technology. So that's the kind of field that I'm exploring here at Facebook. So, all right, that was too much about the brand and the business. Let's back up a little bit and let's focus on the perspective of an individual designer, right? We all agree that design is a very collaborative process. And a very important part of that collaborative process is listening to feedback that you receive when you present something as a designer. So let me show you how I navigate through feedback that I receive when working on complex projects. So to kind of set the context, generally feedback is perceived as either positive or negative. Instead of that binary nature, I like to think of it as appreciative and constructive feedback. And then there's another dimension to it, which is whether that feedback is something I was clearly anticipating or not. So that gives us these 4 quadrants. And then whenever I present my design inputs and receive feedback from the stakeholders, I try to see which quadrant that piece of feedback really fits into. And then I try to take next steps accordingly. So this is a very useful framework, I believe, and I would really encourage all of us to give it a try the next time we hear feedback. Cool. So I want you all to relax a little bit and look at something lightweight now. This last part is just how I keep myself inspired and motivated in the creative field. I think creativity is a very deliberate pursuit. It's different in the sense that it's not pastime or it's not a hobby. You have to find time for creativity rather than resorting to creativity when you have free time. You see, there's a difference. So the first routine that I kind of try to follow regularly is indulging into calligraphy. And Indian scripts, I think, are really beautiful and attractive. I think of this as a channel for me to have proximity with my culture and literature. And these days I'm exploring how I can combine this with other art forms, such as poetry and singing. My wife, Swapna Joshi, she is a classical singer, and also a designer. So we both worked on a project recently where we tried to mix the visual and auditory aesthetics together for this old classic poem from Marathi language. So there's always more and more room for experimentation with different art forms. Watercolors is another medium I enjoy using a lot. And again, kind of going back to the notion of finding new venues, I have exhibited the paintings a few times around India, and those experiences were tremendously rewarding because I could meet like-minded people and even few renowned artists. Those are based in India. So the moral of the story is don't just stop after you make things, but try to find ways to put those things in front of the world, see how the world reacts to what you have created. And sketching, of course, is the foundation and the backbone of all of those venues. This is something I try to do continuously. And lastly, woodworking is another passion, another dimension that I'm kind of picking up on. And honestly, these days I miss going to the workshops, going to my favorite machines in the wood shops because of the pandemic restrictions. So I'm going to stop here at the note of COVID-19. I hope everyone is staying safe and taking care of themselves. Thank you so much. This was my creative journey so far. And I'm always happy to connect with all of you and learn more about what's your next adventure. Thank you.
Few questions on your professional pursuits and creativity and design. So let's start with a simple question. How do you spend your time? How does a day in the life of Dhruv Damle looks like?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question, especially given the current context of the pandemic. Let's kind of remove that premise and let's just think about the world where everything is normal. On those days, I typically try to spend only 9 to 5, and again, this is another kind of explosive dimension to a lot of people from the world of design. I want to spend only 9 to 5 for the professional job. I try to stick to that. There are days when I cannot, but most of the times I manage to. Apart from that, I try to focus on a lot of routines that I try to build up over time and try to getting better at those. And that includes not just the creative activities that I kind of touch based on towards the end of my presentation, but also a few mundane things like cooking, for example. I just cook daily, every evening after I finish my day job. So that's one thing. The other is taking care of my beautiful indoor plants here. And kind of going back to the 9 to 5 routine, I want to emphasize that when you think of it in a holistic sense, design is not essentially a unicorn. It's just like other fields when you think of it in a whole business perspective. And to say that creativity is a pursuit that takes its own timeline, I think that's a wrong premise, at least to think in the professional world. So even design has its limitations and its boundaries that you must respect and try to maintain. So I'm kind of trying that as I go further in my career.
Yeah, so there are a lot of hobbies that you have, right? Like taking care of your plants, and even cooking, if I may say so. So, what do you think? What are the benefits of these on your life and creativity in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll kind of go back to sharing an experience where I came to realize that these routines really have an impact on my creative process. So I was not very much aware of that happening in the back of my mind. But then something really interesting happened when I was in New York. I looked at New York Brooklyn Half Marathon, which was something that I just came across by. And I don't really exactly remember the reason why, but I gave it a serious thought. Hey, I was never an athlete person. I was never into sports, and I never thought seriously about my physical fitness at all. I thought, why not uh, give this one a try? Why not start running and let's see how that goes. So I started running. I started from level zero, and then I started gradually ramping up, starting really just 1 or 2 miles every alternate day in my first week, and then going all the way to 13 miles towards the end of 3 months. I think that was pretty awesome, and it made me realize a few things that I was not previously aware of. Those were that once you start spending more and more time on those routines, it's like you automatically develop the habit of tuning yourself into that zone where it's kind of easier for you to, block everything else, block all the thoughts, all the kind of bonds you have with the physical world around you, and then just focus so much on the task at hand, the routine that you're going to follow. So, kind of setting the time windows in part of your routine, I think, has a deep impact on you being able to switch context really well and you being able to focus really well on that.
So do you think it's meditative, right? In
Yes,
terms of
absolutely.
I also see that like you pick up different skill sets or like different hobbies and things like that, like being running one of those, and then
Hmm.
you there. I met you at Facebook, this March, and you said that woodworking is something that, and there are a couple of other things that you were trying, right? Even like plants and stuff like that. So do you
Hmm.
deliberately do that to challenge your limits? Is that one of the aims that you try with your things?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's kind of um, kind of disintegrate that question a little bit. So,
Yeah.
adapting to new hobbies is definitely something I take a lot of interest in, and then thinking of that as a means to challenge myself. I think that may or may not be true for all of these. Like running was definitely something that I took up as a challenge and evolved into something that was actually um, achievable.
Hmm.
But for a lot of other things, there were failures as well. Like woodworking is a good example where there are factors that are completely outside of your control. Like woodworking is a costly hobby. It's like you need a base where you can actually stack up all your tools. Material is costly, and then you have to like really either have that setup ready with you at your disposal, or have somewhere where you can just go visit paper or something and then use that facility. So whenever I had access to those, I was able to spend time on that. But otherwise, it's pretty much kind of outside of my reach. So going back to the notion of challenge, I think that's definitely true. And I remember reading this book called Moonwalking with Einstein, where um, the book is about how you can improve your memory techniques and how you can really excel at remembering so many mm, different things, so many disparate things at the same time into your capacity. So the author writes about how he used those techniques to um, learn so much about memory improvisations, and even won the world championship contests that happen around this topic. So I think there is definitely value in that notion.
So, while trying these new pursuits, right, be it hobby, be it creative pursuits or anything, you do encounter like, sometimes failures. Um,
Hmm.
how do you deal with such failures?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's kind of unavoidable for many of those pursuits. Um, so um, I think I go back to asking myself, what was the point again? Why exactly I started this? Why exactly did I pick this route? So going back to that question sometimes gives me clarity that, hey, for example, um, let's say indoor farming was something I was really passionate about at certain point. Couldn't pick it up after a while. So I really asked myself, what was the core notion that I wanted to um, tackle while I started this project? It wasn't really about uh, getting to eat food. It was just about um, the roller coaster and getting into that sense that, hey, I want to try this, so I give it a shot, and then I might fail, but I at least wouldn't have regrets that I did not try.
So every designer has a story that why did they become a designer? What's yours?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. it's it's um, um, it's an interesting story. So before becoming a designer, I was an engineer, and yeah, that's pretty mundane in India, especially in Pune. So I studied undergraduation, my bachelor's degree in computer science engineering, and then I worked for a year as a front-end software developer. That was the time when I came in touch with the designers, and I was amazed to just see their abilities to convert abstract thoughts into tangible ideas, or let's say abstract ideas into actual tangible products that you can actually look at. So that gave me a starting point, and then always having this passion or sense that drew me towards the aesthetic values that are visually appealing to me. I think the combination of both of them really had drawn me to the career of design.
Okay. What is good design for you?
Yeah, I think good design for me is something that leaves no more room for you to kind of add more and more stuff to it. Um, and I would also like to add that good design um, does two things. First of all, it kind of tries to respect the decisions that were made in the past and tries to resonate well with the old design if that is to be maintained. And the second thing is it does the same for scaling up. So tomorrow, if that feature, product, service, or project has to be redesigned, this design that I'm currently working on should allow some kind of a segue into that.
What part of your academics did help you in changing, not changing or switching these jobs or working on really different things? You've worked on amazingly different portfolio, right? Starting from your headphones at Bose
Mhm.
to Facebook right now. So, what part of your academics really helped you in these processes or changing these jobs or working on them in general?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say that the moment I entered National Institute of Design, the moment I joined NID, I knew that there is
Mhm.
something different about the world of design, and it's not that I had not thought of um, pursuing a creative career ever before. At one point as a teenager, I had given serious thought to architecture, for example. So, coming to the world of design as a new student that had entered NID, um, I think the process that completely um, changed my perspective about the world is just unlearning the engineering heavy approach. Even for the tech industry, as I grew being a designer in the digital space, I realized that even in the computer science industry, there's hardly hardly like half or even fewer than that people that are engineers or that take care of the code itself. The rest, everyone is mostly about making the right connections within the business models or within people or finding the right opportunities of how that product would connect ultimately to the ultimate users. So that unlearning was, I think, the big moment that really pushed me to think that, hey, there's so much more to the tech industry and the tech world that I can really exploit being a designer.
What do you think the future role of designers are, or how do you see design in future?
Yeah, that's something I really passionately think about a lot. I think the role of a designer is being a philosopher in some sense, but at the same point being tied to the ground reality of it. Um, and when it comes to future, I think the role of a designer is to um, enable the reaches of the technology so that the end users can actually benefit from that. For example, there are really a lot of fancy ideas around you at this point in time, like self-driving cars or colonization of Mars. So as a
Yeah.
designer and the one in the future, I like to think about really big ideas like how would people interact with one another when they're sitting in a completely driverless car? What would that experience look like? So
Mhm.
yeah, those are the kind of projects. And I think designers shouldn't limit themselves right there. Think of
Mhm.
like ideas that are not even decades, but like centuries ahead of now. Like think of problems or opportunities that are here today in our world, but those are just not articulated well. Or a good example would be think of how the society and the socio-economical structures were like in 1700s or 1800s. Um,
Mhm.
what are those behaviors or social patterns that were so normal back then, but are now totally obsolete, are now totally transformed into something else? And then try to extrapolate that about going from today to, let's say, 2100.
Do you have any design inspiration that you would like to share with us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I have a rather different take on answering this question. Of course, there are a number of interesting designers that are putting in really amazing work in front of the whole world.
Yeah.
Um, but what really inspires me is the grassroots um, innovations or the grassroots, um, not just big ideas, but big takes on even mundane ideas like people that think about, hey, how can I make payments simpler? Or how I can just remove the notion of banking altogether. I think those
Mhm.
are some interesting things. And
Mhm.
to go to real people or to real brands that cannot do that, few things that come to mind and few people and brands that come to mind are definitely Satish Gokhale from Pune, um,
Mhm.
who I think is a kind of a grassroots design person in that
Mhm.
sense. Another couple of things that I can think of are definitely from Silicon Valley, how small businesses really take advantage of seeing gaps in big models of financial platforms. For example, Google, Facebook, all of these products have a certain model of e-commerce. And then there are, in the Bay Area, there are like literally hundreds of companies that have built their fortune on kind of bridging those small gaps and finding those really small opportunities. So it doesn't have to be a big idea, but it has to be something that would really appeal to the public.
You read a lot of books, right? And you did share with us Moonwalking with Einstein, right? That was the book that you
Mhm.
did share with us. Are there any more books that you would like to recommend us?
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I like with books is um, something I'm trying these days is kind of reading multiple books parallelly. Like before finishing the first one, you start reading the second one, and then going back to book n minus one would
Yeah.
would always have you excited about, hey, where I was, and would make you shuffle through a number of pages. You would read a lot of stuff. I think that is exciting, and few books that I'm reading in parallel these days are the first one is called Why We Sleep. I forgot the name of the author, unfortunately. The book is about uh, essentially the topic of sleep and psychology of sleep. It ultimately tackles the goal of being able to take care of your mental health, and then answering the question about how you should sleep. But it really starts from why you should sleep. So that's an interesting book called Why We Sleep. The other one I'm reading is 0 to 1 from Peter Thiel. Peter was one of the fundamental early day uh, person who offered funds to Mark Zuckerberg to start Facebook. So he's a capitalist and he has a lot of venture activities in the Bay Area. So he has this book called 0 to 1. He talks about how you can take small ideas to big platforms. And the third one I'm reading these days is The Hard Thing About the Hard Things. That's from Ben Horowitz. Interestingly, that book is written from the perspective of how to run a startup, but I like to relate uh, chapters from that book to just the world of design and just to look at how design and business kind of go hand in hand.
Any of your favorite quotes that inspires you?
Um,
It can be in any
yeah,
language.
yeah. The favorite quote I remember right at this moment is it's not it's not who will or let me start from the beginning. The quote is I want to do something really extraordinary, and the quote is it's not really who's going to let me do that, but it's really who's going to stop me. You know,
Oh, wow.
it essentially imbibes the very solid vibe of self-confidence and kind of taking a step further into following your passion. And interestingly, this is from a fictionary character, Howard Roark, from Ayn Rand's um, The Fountainhead.
And the last question, do you have any advice for young budding designers? Though your presentation did cover a lot of it, but any quote that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would like to say a couple of things. Number one is think of design as a field that is complementary and that is not competition. It's ultimately the user that you want to advocate for. It's not you that ultimately wins. It's your design that wins. Um, so don't just solve problems that are kind of seen by the others, but try to find problems that were rather never even seen by the others. Or think of the known unknowns. Think of what everyone knows that hey, this is something that we need to solve, and then think of unknown unknowns. Like what is something that would really take my project or my product miles ahead from where it is today. And I think the key to that is bold communication. So really step forward, really be bold, have an opinion. We are all humans. It's okay to kind of say out loud your opinion without having any data backing it up. See, data is only something that supports you, but essentially it's you who have to uh, uh, hypothesize your opinion first. So that would be my advice.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, Dhruv. Here's a small token of love and appreciation for all the good work that you've done and inspiring us. We confer upon you the title of Inspiring Young Designer. And yeah, so you've inspired us today. Thank you so much with your thoughts, for your thoughts and your, answers to the questions and your time. Thank you so much, Dhruv. And you're our inspiring young designer. Thank you for coming to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And this was really exciting for me on so many levels. First of all, because this was first ever appearance from my side on such a platform, so it feels nice. It also allows me to kind of give back to the community in certain sense, and I'm always open to hearing from all of you about your big ideas. Yeah, so let's stay in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, Dhruv.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Yeah, bye.
You too. Bye.